Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first of our second series of workshops. Bienvenue à au premier atelier de notre deuxième série. If you are interested in checking out any of the other recordings, they're all available from our previous series. They're all available on the program page, which I will paste in the chat. And if you're watching this video, you're on that page. So congratulations, you have found the recordings. Si vous voulez voir les enregistrements des ateliers qu'on a fait en 2021, vous pouvez aller à la page qui se trouve dans le chat. Et si vous regardez présentement la vidéo, vous avez trouvé la page, donc félicitations, et vous pouvez découvrir les autres ateliers qui ont eu lieu précédemment sur cette page. So without any further ado, let's start the new year off with some talking about, what are we talking about today, Inga?
We are talking about advanced search engine optimization today. So it's really those are all fancy words, I know. It's really sort of a continuation. You may recall, if you were in the first series of workshops back in the fall, the first thing we did was to look at a self-assessment of your web presence. So I thought the second series, which is going to be focusing more on just slightly more advanced web stuff that is now essential in terms of your web presence. So things like machine readable data, making sure that search engines can provide answers from your content as opposed to just search results, and getting our heads around a thing called open linked data, which is part of that sort of universe of how the web has evolved in the last how many years? Probably 5 for all intents and purposes, a little bit longer in terms of the technical capacity. So the first thing that I thought we should do is, focus again on assessment, but as opposed to a self-assessment, to look at what an assessment looks like that a tool might provide from a technical standpoint on what your website actually does today. So that's sort of what we're talking about today. Make sense? It's very exciting stuff. All right. It's good to see you all again. It feels like it's been a bit of a sluggish start to 2022. So I'm just back this week from a couple of weeks off, and calibrating my head around, oh, right, I'm supposed to do workshops and I'm supposed to talk about the digital realm as opposed to just shoveling snow up here in the Yukon and figuring out how to stay warm. So we'll do our best. I do want to start obviously by acknowledging as well that since I am joining you from the Yukon, from Whitehorse, that also means that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Kwanandan First Nation and Taankwachan Council, which are self-governing First Nations up here. Most of the First Nations in the Yukon are self-governing. There's 14 in total, and 11 of them have concluded their agreements between 1993 and probably 2009. So it's a different reality than most of Ontario, in a good way. So what what I'd like to start with is, so there's a number of tools. Have any of you ever tried to figure out, how well your website does in terms of search engine optimization? Have you ever have you? And Andrea, what have if you remember, what have you used to try to figure that out?
Amy does that for Crane Creations, and it's Google Analytics that we use on the backside of WordPress. It's plugged in there. Mm-hmm. So that's one part. And the second part that we use is in the front. We will also, among ourselves and other people that we know, just ask if we Google various things, at what level do we rank, because it happens differently based on our search histories too.
Absolutely. And that's actually a really good approach, right? Is to say, hey, I care about this keyword. Do I show up on the first page? Right? And just actually do the Google search. Anybody else ever tried to figure out how well you do in search engines? Eugenia, Eileen?
We've just done stuff like simply using Google with different ways and seeing if I turn up on the page or not, and back in the olden days, whether you were below the advertisement ones whether you're on the first page, and if you were on the first page, you went, oh, I'm wonderful because I'm on the first page. And if you're on, you had to figure out whatever. But most of the time, you then know exactly what you're looking for. So you don't know what other people are looking for to find you. So it only tells you what your intuition about what you think you are is. So whether somebody else would think you're that is questionable.
It's always a challenge when you're in a niche, any niche, whether it's in the arts or some other sector. It's always a challenge because niche searches are done less often than super generic ones, right? So I might do a search for performing arts, and if I do a search for performing arts, do you show up, right? As opposed to I do a search for puppetry event, which is very much more specific, much more niche, right? Or somebody might do a search for theater or plays, and if you don't use that language of a play relative to, let's say, a puppetry event, you might or you might not, right? Then all kinds of really strange things can happen. So you're always navigating on the keyword side. You're always navigating, trying to kind of position yourself in a broad enough category that people actually search for, versus the specifically who you are or what you do, right? And it's not an easy navigation. So it is useful, Eileen, to actually start with what do you care about, which might be more specific, right? It might require a little bit more knowledge, but it might actually hit your market better. And that might be a function of the location you're in. If you're in Toronto or Mississauga, that might be a bit harder because they're so much bigger. So many more people live there. So many more activities are happening there than if I'm in Stratford, which is a little bit more contained. You're also dealing with the behemoth that Stratford has, right? So the navigation on that, it requires a lot of judgment. And at the end of the day, one of your judgments is, do people show up to my online events? Do people show up to my physical events? Like it becomes the sale at the end often that we end up sort of saying, oh, so therefore my stuff must be performing okay. So what I'm interested in trying to get us to think about a little bit is more on the technical search engine optimization side. And it's going to lead us really quickly into the topics for the next couple of weeks, which have to do with machine readable data, which is another way of saying, a machine is a search engine, right? It's not a human. And it interprets information online all the time. And machine readable basically alludes to the fact that machines are becoming capable of understanding information. Now, understanding is normally a term that we ascribe to humans. Understanding means that a machine understands that a price is a price, that an address is an address, that a particular type of event is, in fact, that particular type of event. It's not a music event, it's a theater event. It's not only a theater event, it's a puppetry show for adults on a topic. So that level of understanding is, in the past used to be ascribed to humans. Machine readable information uses a bunch of techniques that we need to feed it in order to actually purport to understand. So that as a concept is actually quite challenging. It's sort of like the difference between understanding that what DOG is. DOG is 3 letters, it's a sequence, and Google always was able to match up other occurrences of DOG as a word, right? Versus understanding that that's an animal with 4 legs, comes with lots of species within, and has a relationship to humans. Might be a pet, right? So that level of understanding is something that didn't used to be possible. So when we're starting to, I'm going to just circle back here. So when we're starting to look at this advanced search engine optimization, we're quickly getting into these concepts of machine readable data that fosters understanding and that fosters an ability for search engines to provide us with answers, not just search results, right? So we've talked about this a little bit in our fundamental series, where when you do a Google search today, you will end up getting these boxes that will say stuff about whatever you were searching, right? It won't just give you the blue links to websites. It'll actually give you answers. And if you're looking for organizations or events, Google in particular has developed ways to actually show you what's on this week or this month in your area of search. And it gives you a bunch of small boxes to do that. All of those are driven by machine readable data. And the mechanism that is used is called structured data, or structured metadata. And that structured data requires a standard. So all search engines have congregated around using the same structured data markup, the tags that are used to define what a piece of content is, like what is DOG, could be the name of a play, could be an animal that I'm referring to, right? Like, unless I tell the search engine what I mean by it. So those tags are used to do that. And the standard that search engines have embraced has been developed by search engines under an organization called schema.org. That's SCHEMA, schema.org. Quite literally a schema, right? Thank you, Amy. And we're not going to go to that site today, but we might well end up on that site in our next session. Because it is useful to understand a little bit about, what the train of thought is that they're putting forward, as we're then trying to render our content in a useful to search engines way. We only care about being useful to search engines because that's how the general public or your potential audience will find you online, right? If that wasn't the case, we wouldn't give a hoot about that. So one of the tools that I use quite frequently, just to get a quick read on how usually a client's website is doing, is a thing called SEOsitecheckup.com. And what's nice about it is you can check one website a day for free without having to set up even a free account there. There's a bunch of other tools that do really similar things. I've always liked that because they give you a fairly straight narrative about how your site is doing. So I just put the link into this page. And what I would invite you to do, if your screen is large enough to open a second window, not to close this one down, but if your screen is large enough to open a second window on a web browser, I would invite you to actually do that. And go to that URL that I just put into the chat, and you will find a window, a little bar where you can put in your organization's URL or one of your URLs that you care about, just a homepage. And if you give it a few moments, it'll return a report. And what I would love to do, so I have one pulled up for one of my websites, but it's not an arts website, it's a consultant website. But it's all the same stuff, right? So I have mine done from last night, and I want to share that with you, just to actually go through the meaning of that report with you, so that you can sort of understand what's important, what's not important, and how to interpret a report like that, and what you might want to do about it. So out of curiosity, looks like some of you are working online, so that's good. Has the report shown up yet for any of your stuff? Amy, yours has. It's working. Eileen, just working. Eugenia, are you working on it?
It's loading its results. My computer is taking its very long time.
No, that's okay. It's not necessarily super fast. And Victoria is here as well. Not sure, Victoria, if you might be having lunch or something. If you're able to sort of take a look at that. We have once your report shows up, one of the top line things you will get is an SEO score. Amy, curious what yours is. Eileen, curious what yours is. Just a straight up number.
I put in the chat 87 for Crane Creations.
Great.
82.
82 for which is it?
Springworks.
Springworks?
Springworksfestival.ca.
Awesome. Those are
Our
good
builder
scores.
is surprising. Thank you, builder.
Beth, did you do a search for something else by chance?
No, I'm not. I'm basically just voyeuring here, and
Fair enough.
I'm actually not involved in doing the
Mhm.
websites. So
Yeah, no, for
I
sure.
leave it to Eileen.
For sure. Eugenia, anything show up yet?
Yeah, I got 90.
Fantastic. And Andrea got a 90 for Crane.
Yeah,
And
mine
Amy
says
gets an
87.
87. How can the same website have two different results? That's a great question. What did each of you input?
I put Crane HTTPS www.cranecreations.ca.
Andrea, what did you put in?
Mine was without the HTTPS.
Okay. That might be why. I'm not sure. It seems a little unusual to me that you would get two different results, and it might. Did you have the www? Yeah. It might be whatever the default pieces that that comes up, and the difference might be the HTTPS part. Because many websites, like your website exists in multiple versions sometimes with the www, sometimes without the www. Like there's been an evolution, and both should work often, normally they do, but they don't always all go to the same exact pages. This might seem really weird to you, but it's actually true. So that can generate a difference in result as well. And then whether a site, and then if you didn't type in the HTTPS, or you didn't just copy the thing potentially, that can also make a difference, because it might default to HTTP, which might actually work on some sites, even if it's an HTTPS. And just out of curiosity, does everybody understand the difference between the two? So when you look at on the top of the browser, your browser right now, and you're on the SEO site, checkup site, right before the website URL that is sitting there, you will see a log, right? And that log says that what that means is that it's an HTTPS site. And what that means, the S is a security feature that is a way to encrypt your web content when it goes back and forth over the internet. And it's usually an SSL encryption that is used. And SSL simply stands for secure socket layer. Like that's as meaningful to me as saying SSL. But it really just encrypts the transaction of data being uploaded and downloaded when you go visit websites, and it's supposed to be more secure. So that's the entire difference. A certificate for that might cost you $40 for a year. A lot of web developers, throw them into your package now, because they know that Google favors those kind of sites. And Amy, I just see that you refreshed it and you now get 90. So you've improved without doing anything. I love that. Now, when you're getting to when you're getting into the 80s, you're doing really, really well, because one of the things you'll notice is they don't actually test 100 items. They test about 50 some, right? So it's roughly 2 points per item, right? Like it's 2 percentage points. So when you're getting into these high numbers, there's very few things wrong or not ideal in your site. There might be, 2 things that they will consider serious, and there might be 3 or 4 or 5 more things that they say that you have some kind of failure, and then you decide whether those are things that you need to fix or not, right? Like never just do whatever they all want you to do, because some of that is just make work. And if you have a site that's older, the challenges are on your older pages, because you didn't go retrofit everything to your current way of doing something. Or if you have a WordPress site and you added a plugin, you won't go back to the 100 other blog posts from the last 10 years to fix those, right? Like that's just ludicrous. Like, why would you waste your time? But you're going to do things moving forward that are better, right? So you always need to apply your judgment to this. Now, anybody want to share their screen so we can see your results? Not share your screen, but share the web browser with the results in it. Is that Aline? Because that might be more fun than looking at the strategic moves one. my score, by the way, is 86. So I have never seen 100 yet. And in arts organizations, I used to see a lot of 60s, which is not great. All right, here we are. So we are looking at 47 passes. Oops, sorry, you're no longer sharing your screen. You were sharing your screen. It's coming back. Of course, but as soon as somebody shares their screen, it puts you into full screen mode. So I'm going to leave that in for now. And Eileen, what I'm going to ask you bit by bit is to actually scroll through the results. So at the top line here, 82, I used to be pretty happy with. And quite often the pieces that are missing is either there's something funky in keywords, like you may or may not be using keywords in all the right places, or you're not using structured data. Those are often the predominant issues when you get a high score like that. The language they use around failed, warnings, and passes, understand that the tool we're using is a tool that an SEO company has created to help us out. It's also a sales tool for them. So some of that language, just be aware, it can be a little harsher than it needs to be. Like a failure seems dire, right? But be aware that we're using a free tool from a company in the business of selling SEO services. That's all I want to say about that. Now, when you scroll down a little bit, one of the things I like about this is when it comes to the issues to fix, they will give you the issues to fix in the summary box. So if you stop scrolling there, that's great. And you see there's a little scroll bar in the box itself where it says issues to fix, Eileen? Exactly. So it goes from high to medium to low. And it's their assessment of the things that you should pay attention to. So if we look at the two high ones that were there, if you scroll back up in the little box, I know it's kind of hard to grab the bar sometimes. There were two that say high, and it says your most common keywords are not appearing in one or more of the meta tags above. Right? So your primary keyword should appear in your meta tags. So what the test here did, it basically looked at the content of your page, and it will have identified keywords. And a keyword is simply a word that shows up often on your website. Simple as that, right? So it's just a straight up count that this tool would conduct. And then it takes a look at your title tags, your description tag, and other meta tags to figure out whether those keywords that identified are actually used. And in this case, as is often the case, that's not done. So if you scroll down a little bit, you see that most common keywords test. If you scroll down on the page itself, sorry, not within the box, Eileen, but on the page, exactly. Just keep scrolling a little bit. Okay, here we go. So, oh, sorry, go up a little bit. Most common keywords. So what you see here is the most common keywords on your page happen to be networks, supporters, puppet works, dance works, and arts. So the networks and supporters are not great. They're great for lots of things, but they're not great to represent the puppetry art, right? But you might have reasons why they show up, of course. So what happens here is then, and then the next piece says, are you using those keywords? And they're not included in title tag. They're included in title tags, but not in meta description tag on a page. So this is simply a hint to say, like a lot of websites, your website is struggling with sort of using keywords and then using it in not just in the content, but using it in those meta tags, right? And then you get to make a judgment, right? So when you see a result like this, where it basically puts networks and supporters on par with puppet works and dance works and arts, you might say, oh, actually that's unintended, or it might be useful for your purposes right now, right? So be aware that that's driven by the actual words on your website. And chances are it might be more prevalent on your homepage, in fact, right, that it's counting here. And then it basically just looks at whether they're getting used. So if they're not, so what you need to decide is if they're not the right keywords for you, you need to figure out to write your content to the keywords that matter to you. Okay, so the words need to show up on the page. It's as simple as that. And if they don't show up on the page, try to fix that. And then the second step is, once you fix that in the actual content of the page, you got to fix it also to represent those in your title tag, which is showing up as the, when you go to a website, you see the tabs at the top of your page in the gray bar that are actually part of the browser, right? That's where your title tag shows up. The other place your title tag shows up is when a Google search result is returned. The title tag of a page is the blue link at the top. Or if somebody puts your web page onto Facebook, Facebook uses the title tag as the heading to the link, right? So it has lots of uses, but they're not actually on the page uses. So those are the things, those are the basic things that are actually easy to fix that would make a fairly big difference. And like I say, you wouldn't go back to previous events or to 100 blog posts and fix each one of them, but you would start to implement that moving forward, right? And the title tag is for a page. It's not for the website. It's for each individual page. So you have a lot of opportunity to make sure that your events are optimized properly versus the general information about your company, which would have potentially different keywords attached to it, of course, right? An event tends to be much more specific. It now is a play, or it now is a puppet show, or it now is an event that happens in December or in January. Like, there's a lot of parameters that you can add in a title tag, including dates and places, that are really, really useful. What I'm trying to get at here is I'm trying to help you understand that just, like that high rating of, it's a high priority. The keywords are still a really important part of being able to be found, because keywords is what people use to search for you. So it's still the first parameter that shows up, that you still need to pay attention to. And it's a super common one to struggle with. And like I say, the discerning part has to be, don't fix the past, take good actions moving forward. Because spinning your wheels is really no point to it. And then you see a bunch of other keyword tests they do, right? Which, they're interesting. And then they start selling you services really quickly. So you see the get it now bit that happens there. And you could do a competitor domains test. I always ignore the competitor part when it comes to the arts, because, all boats rise, more than, we're competing with each other. I think you're more prone to compete with, movie houses than you are to compete with other arts organizations. So the competitor domain test, I always ignore, but those are all things you can purchase if you're into that kind of a mindset. And this is where, I want to just highlight that here, because like I say, we're using a free tool created by an SEO company that's in the business of making its living out of selling these services. So I never use them, because I can get a lot of that stuff free from Google itself. When I use, the Google ad engine, for example, there's keywords tools in there. And I can actually figure out, sort of frequency of search terms this week, this month, quite easily. I don't have to pay for it. There is a convenience factor that, sometimes convenience is something that we want to pay for. So then here, the next piece is your headings tags. Again, this is just a tag, right? And it basically says, are you using H1 tags? H1 simply stands for heading level 1. A heading level 1, in any document, when you do a grant report, you use headings of different sizes, different weights. Heading level 1, is a way to say, here's what this next section of content is about. And you set it up, in any narrative text to be an important series of keywords, basically. So it simply checks that you're using H1 tags, because they're set to content. They're more important than H2 and H3 and H4, right? In any document, it's the same. H1 is expected by a search engine to give you the most important context for the content on your page. So that's why it asks specifically whether you use them. I have a very bad habit. I use templates, right? As most of us are using templates for websites, we use templates. So the H1 heading can often be incredibly large, and it can, if you're on a mobile device, it can take up half the page, right? All of a sudden on a scroll. So I often simply fudge it, and I will assign a lesser heading because it has a graphically more pleasing look. That is a bad habit. What I should be doing is I should go into the settings, or I should ask my web developer to go into the settings and make the H1 heading work on the page. I should make it smaller, change the font size, so I will use it, right? So in a lot of my websites, I get an error there. And that's why I hover in the low 80s as opposed to high 80s sometimes. And then you see the robot.txt sitemap stuff here, really, really important. Those get auto-generated often when you use templates. And if you get an error there, you'd absolutely want to create them. Why are they important? You're helping search engines index your site with having both of those available. The reason why, and what a robot.txt file does, is basically it excludes things from being crawled by search engines. This is important for any of us who use like the do-it-yourself website makers. So whether that's WordPress or Wix or Foursquare, there's an administrative section, right, to your site. If you don't exclude that from being crawled, it will be crawled. You don't want the admin part of your site to be crawled, basically. So when you're using WordPress and stuff like that, the robot.txt file is usually auto-generated, and it just usually says disallow the admin section of the site that's not public for humans to read. Basically, is what it comes down to. Or sometimes you may have a page that you just want to have be private, completely private. You only want to send a link to your 3 friends, right? So you may exclude a page like that that you don't want crawled. And then the sitemap is just making sure that the search engine actually goes to every page on your site. And again, they're often auto-generated. So you don't have to think about it much. But if you see an error here, you want to figure out how to do that pretty quickly. It's not hard. It never is hard, right? Can we go back to the top again, where it gives us the high, medium, and low priorities in terms of fixing stuff? Perfect. And if you can scroll up a little bit. So size of your website is mentioned here, and it gives you a standard, the average should be 30 KB kilobytes. That's a tiny, tiny load, right? One of the things that can happen is if you're using auto run video, or you're loading video and images that are quite heavy, like if you didn't optimize an image for web use and you put all of a sudden a 5 megabyte image up on your homepage, it'll look the same, right? But the load time is completely different than if you had optimized that for the web before you upload it. That's often the only problem there, is that your image sizes themselves are kind of heavy. And they give you a bunch of hints that might be reducing in your case some of these things. Most of the time, most of that is accounted for by the template itself that you're using. And sometimes you decide that, hey, I'm in a visual art form, I'm going to use this high quality image, and that's just the way it is. Again, use your judgment on a thing like that. 139K are still pretty quick loading, right? They're just higher than an average that websites prefer. As you know, Google still uses speed, right, as a key determinant of whether it will rank your site a little bit higher. But because you're in a but then you triage, right? I'm in a niche art form, I'm already niche, and people who come to my site are going to be interested. This is not a random search I'm doing for, where am I buying my next vacuum cleaner? Where some of these things become a lot more important because you're in a retail competitive environment. You're actually not in that kind of a competitive environment. So never underestimate your ability to apply your own judgment to whether some of this is important or not. Okay. Does that make some sense? I want to make sure that you look at this kind of report with discernment, that you don't just say, oh, this is now truth, and I got to figure this out, and I got to do a bunch of, work to figure it out. So in your case, Alina, I would say absolutely make sure that you start fixing the keyword stuff, and that you use the description tag, and you use the keywords that matter to you in that are relative to the content on the page, of course. Must you figure out the speed by itself? Maybe, right? Would be my discerning hint on that. And then you see a whole bunch of these medium things, and chances are most of us have no freaking clue what any of that means. So it is useful. And then, oh, the low one, I like the low one. I got that on mine too. Is we have found 2 email addresses in your page code. We advise you to protect email links in a way that hides them from spam harvesters, right? So things like that also show up in that SEO check. And that's simply, I actually publish my business email, Puppetry@strategicmoves.ca. I do publish that. And I do get a little bit of spam, not a huge amount. So again, because my site is primarily business to business and people primarily use it in that context, I want you to have my email, and I'm going to take that. I'm going to few spam messages. Those are choices we get to make. But basically, you're getting a sense here of highlights. The report in total is probably about 8 pages in a Word document, right? So if we start scrolling through the actual more detailed report, Eileen, you see at the beginning, it's always about keywords and whether you're using the basic tags well. And when you're not, that's actually pretty easy to fix moving forward. If you keep scrolling a little bit further, you start getting quickly into, keep going, you're still in the tags here. You used to get into the, sort of the robot and sitemap pieces. And then you're starting to get into whether your site is using SEO friendly URLs. What is an SEO friendly URL? Anybody want to venture a guess at this? It's one that uses plain English language. So you may remember back when we were developing custom management systems for websites, you ended up getting like these database systems that would drive web content, and they have these gobbledygook pages, like it might say cbc.ca/English/12345 exclamation mark, blah, blah, like stuff like that, completely unintelligible. So some of my websites are quite old. They're like started in 2009 or something like that, when WordPress was doing that as well, where you would get these gobbledygook things. They no longer do that. They now basically use real words. So real words are SEO friendly, simple as that. While gobbledygook stuff or codes of some sort, or just numerics, like a numeric would be 2022-0108. That's January 8th, 2022, right? And if you all of a sudden started using just kind of your calendar dates to try to denote content on your webpage, you would start to find that they would be considered not SEO friendly, because it's essentially gobbledygook, and people don't do that search. They do searches for shows and plays and what's on tonight and what's on this week and what are the online events I can go to, and stuff like that. So that people use plain English or French or whatever language to search. That's all that means. So somewhere in my stuff there is legacy, and in your stuff there isn't, that uses some of these strange things. Image alt test. Do you know what alt refers to? Alternative. So when you put an image on the website, we often do that without having any without assigning either captions or a description tag or any keywords to it. So if you're using something like WordPress, when you upload an image of any sort or a file of any sort, you can immediately assign those things to those images. And when you don't do that, chances are you will never do it. So what happens is that those images are not findable by a search engine, and you're leaving an opportunity on the table. So imagine you put up a production shot for one of your shows, but you didn't tag it in any way. 2 things will happen. Search engines just dismiss that JPEG, because chances are it's just a numeric kind of a file name anyways. It'll just dismiss it. It won't ever show up in any kind of a search. If you were to add it, you could add keyword-rich information, like what is the show, when is it playing, who's in it, like whatever keywords are actually relevant to the show. You would be able to add those, and then the image itself becomes findable. So it's an additional opportunity that's actually ranks pretty high in terms of being findable online. The other use is the description tag is what is read to people who use web readers. So imagine you're visually impaired and a web reader uses the content. So it's an accessibility issue. So it's useful to use the description tag and say, this is an image of a show taking, called blah, blah, taking place at this place in this time by this company or by this director, whatever the important keywords are, right? So that that image actually gets read and that the user who, for some reason, is using a web reader can actually understand it. Now, as we're getting a bit further down here, it also talks about Google Analytics test. Yes, you've got that. And it can recognize it. So chances are it's integrated on your backend really well. The Favicon test, why is that even here? Do you know what the Favicon is? Do you know how it's used? So you see, again, it's like it shows up right beside the title tag, right? So on your page, you get favicons for P.A.D.E, you get favicons for the workshop, you get a favicon for, you have an Excel file open. Then you've got your Gmail is open. See, we can't see those favicons at the top, right? Those are really helpful because when they're all, and when you don't have one, right, then they all have the standard, it's like a document or something like that. They have a standard gray box. So sometimes those favicons also get used in search results, like Google might pick them up, and they become a bit of a branding opportunity, basically. And like Eileen is showing us here, you got what, about 10 or so 12 of these thingies open right now. They help you navigate on the tabs a little bit, but they're not actually at all important from a search results or SEO ranking standpoint at all. So this is one of those, kind of oddballs where it's useful to have it, but it's more useful to have it from a branding standpoint than from an SEO standpoint. But because it's convenient and easy to check, they just add it to the report. It's kind of fun. Now, backlinks test. Why are backlinks? What are backlinks and why are they important? Anybody want to venture on that? Any hints on why is it important to have your site linked to others and them linked to you? Why do we call the internet also the web? So it's really basic, right? Eileen, you want to venture?
It proves that you exist in some real way and you are mutually validating each other.
Yeah. And so think of it as a spider web, right? What's the most important part in a spider web? It's the central hub, right? And then you have all of these, connections. It's like how airlines work, like Toronto might be your flight hub, and then you have these connections out to the smaller communities. So if you have a lot of links coming to your site, that is really, really good because it makes you literally more important. Now, if you use, remember those sites that are like link harvesters? You get these offers every so often in your email that says, hey, I can list you on my website. And you realize when you go to them that all that is on that website that is trying to market you paying them some money to be listed on their website is links. They don't have content. Search engines don't favor those. What they favor is real websites with real content linking to other websites with related content. So when you present shows, you have artists in companies, all of whom have websites. Your ideal scenario is, and then your festival happens and you might have, I don't know, 50 entities that might have websites that are related to a festival or more, right? Between the artists themselves, the producers, the company, like there might be all kinds. Imagine all of them actually listing your site and the show that they're doing as part of your festival on their site. That makes you a much more important hub in that period of time, right? That's really, really beneficial because Google will favor those that have more links to them that are real like that. So it is important. It's actually quite important. And if you think about the web aspect of that, it becomes quite intuitive to see why that is, right? So you can have like a lot of hubs, micro hubs, you can have more major hubs, you can have regional hubs, or you can have topical hubs. You can be like the expert in puppetry arts or puppetry making or whatever dimension of puppetry you care about quite quickly by simply making sure that your entire community actually starts to link and feed, feed traffic to you basically by doing that. And it's not because they're literally feeding traffic where you're looking for the referral traffic from that site. It's actually, I mean, that's nice to get too, but it's really about search engines will start to regard you and give you more import as a result of that. You're doing really well also on the social media test. All that really says is sometimes people are using a mechanism to link to their social media that this test will not recognize. Like you might have hard links coded into your site. They won't recognize that. What they're really looking for here is whether you're using the utility, like there's little pieces of utility code where you can automate that process. And that's really what that's looking for. And many of us are using those now, like it's an addthis.com or something like that, or a function within the tool that you're using to build your website. There might be a function where they automate that. And that's really what that social media test is looking for. So as I've seen results where you actually are linked to your social media in a useful way, but the test doesn't recognize that. So again, be a little bit discerning there. If you have it on your page, you know it's on your page. The test doesn't always pick every one of those up. Okay. You're obviously doing well here, so that's great. And if you keep scrolling down a little bit, this is all about the speed optimization stuff. One of the reasons why I like this site is because they do tell you how to fix stuff. To get to the how to fix stuff, that's usually where the PADE happens. Right? But if you know something is an issue, nothing holds you back from simply just Googling the question and how to do that. And you might very well find some free tools, or to simply look within WordPress, within Wix, within Foursquare, and see if they have a compression tool that you simply haven't used, because chances are those things exist for free. So here, these are, to me, those are primarily things where an issue is identified. And then, you choose whether it's important, and then you can choose, where to find the solution. Page objects test, you get more than 20 HTTP requests. That simply means that in order to load your home page, there's a lot of pinging back and forth between me as a web user and your server. And that pinging back and forth just takes a little bit of time, right? So your site says it loaded in 4 seconds. The average is 5 seconds. You're doing well on that, even though, like, it gave you that speed test, size issue earlier, right? So look at the site speed as well, and make choices about that. And if you keep scrolling a little bit further, you'll see the objects themselves are driving that. It gives you a lot of detailed information here. So you can make better choices. You don't need to understand all of this, because most of us are working with somebody who helps us with our websites, right? You can say to somebody, hey, is there something we can do about that? You can say to your web developer, can we do something about that moving forward? Is there a utility that we might want to implement on our site so that it's simply accounted for? In the old days, all of this stuff was hard, right? But now with all of these tools that most of us are using to build our sites, we don't do custom development, right? We use templates. And we use other frameworks that are quite well optimized. And when I use those systems, what you'll discover is that they actually are implementing those changes that can be implemented across all sites themselves. So make sure that you keep your WordPress updated, and a lot of the things disappear sometimes. Similarly, you might remember a time when we needed to have a separate mobile website. When smartphones first appeared, we all had to develop a mobile website that was separate from your normal website. Well, that's all fixed now, right? So your site is mobile optimized by default almost all of the time if you're using one of those website builder tools. You don't even have to think about it, right? It's just built into it. So it's a similar process where some of these pieces are becoming dealt with at that level. And the key tends to be to maintain an updated version of it, which takes about 2 seconds. You just say, yes, please update, right? Scroll a little bit further, Eileen. Image caching, all the caching stuff. I got to tell you, caching to me is like gobbledygook big time. Caching is basically used, when you load a website, then you go to CBC a lot, like you go to CBC every day, the site loads pretty quickly. But if you have, emptied your cache on your site, you'll realize that everything takes that little bit longer to load. So when you look on your computer into the internet cache, you'll discover there could be like gigabytes of content sitting there if you've never cleaned that out. There's a benefit to that, which is that sites load more quickly. And you want to make sure that caching is something that is allowed, right? So that's all that's really about. And then there's this really fancy stuff around minification. So that makes stuff smaller, literally, to load it more quickly. Again, those are not things I would ever action myself. If there is a problem at any of my sites, I'd say to my web developer, can we implement the tool that does that? And leave it at that, right? Those are not things that you need to like get crazy about. So that's sort of these technical pieces, and you're doing well on that, Eileen. Why do you think you're doing well on that? Because you understand all of these things, or because your template actually accounts for it, right?
Because I hired a guy. We have a coded website, so it's interesting to know, like it is on a Wix platform, so it is dealing with whatever it is, but it's all coded. So the initial builder presumably coded whatever reasonably well, and then when anything that's done after the coder did it, questionable.
but all the technical things you would never touch, right? So the technical things are by default already taken care of for you, and that you need to figure out your keyword strategy, right? That's just, we know that that's a thing, and you can do that really easily in Wix. In fact, you just need to actually do it. Now here's the HTTPS thing. Your site's secure. That's fantastic. It even pulls up the certificate and when it was, and until it's valid. So your renewal's coming up on February 13. How cool is that? Like, you know, it's amazing how much information about your web presence are completely in the public domain. You know, this is part of what you're seeing here. Like, this is just a random tool. Anybody can see this information. I can do the search on your site and get the same result, right? Plain text email test, we already talked about that. You know, you make choices about whether you publish the email. You sometimes see the ones where people will write out at, like they'll say iPatry, then a space, then the word at, as opposed to the little symbol, and then a space and all of that. They might even say dot, you know, strategic moves, space, DOT, space, CA, to try to, you know, just kind of make it harder for the harvesters to recognize these things. You decide how important that is to you. Now, the mobility usability, you should be quite good at as well. You even see the snapshot of what it would look like on a phone, right? So that's really great because you want to make sure that those things work. And then we get into what they call advanced SEO, and that's all about structured data. So if you look at the very first item here, is it says your web page doesn't take advantage of HTML microdata specifications in order to mark up structured data. This is like a long sentence to say, when we're going to talk about schema.org and we're going to talk about structured data markup, we're going to talk a little bit about this from a standpoint of understanding that sentence fully, but mostly what we're going to be talking about is the tools available that will do that for you. So when, you know, you're not becoming a coder by implementing structured data. That is not usually the requirement. Depending on your framework, there's a couple of different ways to generate the structured data that you need for your page. This is also going to become a lot easier. There's already tools that exist, and the WordPress environment in particular is quite robust about it because it's the oldest one, and there's a lot of developers that are developing on that platform. So it's the most supported, but you can get all the things you need if you're using Wix or if you're using Foursquare or Squarespace or any of the others as well. And this structured data test is worth 2 points, right? So your score is like 82 or something. If you had that, it would only go up to 84. But the impact it has is disproportionate. Okay, so this is one that's really, 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 really important, right? Where you want to start paying a lot of attention to what you're leaving on the table. When we did the workshop, the last workshop we did last series was around how Google sees your site and things like Google events becoming a primary way where people are finding events or what's on and stuff like that. If you don't use structured data, your web content doesn't show up in those answers. And you may remember me talking about, but there may be other ways in which your content shows up in those Google Events answers. And that might be because you're using Eventbrite to sell your tickets, and Eventbrite is fully integrated with using structured data for anything that shows up on their site, or it might be because you're using Facebook events, and the majority of Facebook events are absolutely getting picked up as well. It's just a matter of Google deciding that, oh, those are the same events, and trying to connect up that content. My issue, my contention is always that if you use it on your own site, you become the authoritative source for your own information, as opposed to Eventbrite becoming the authoritative source, or some random calendar event listing that just kind of scrapes content from the web. Or maybe your local paper has an online calendar of events, right? And they're using that. So they may not have all the information, they may not have all the cell attached to your events, right? So the structured data piece is massively important, even though it would only change your score by 2. Right? So again, this is about discernment of what these results mean. Okay, so this is one where we're going to spend the next 2 sessions basically making sense of that in a bunch of detail. And that's, I think, our next workshop is 90 minutes long because of that. So I know it's always tricky when we need to add a little bit of time, but I think we want to make sure that we can cover not just the WordPress versions of that, but also the other tools and how you generate the structured data for your events and for your organizations. There is and it can be a bit overwhelming. So, you know, I wanted to sort of give you a bit of a heads up that that's one way to get into this conversation, is by looking at this kind of an assessment. Let's see, anything else here that's really important? You're doing really well on all of that stuff, so that's great. And I think that should be, and then you're back on the summary there. Now we have a couple of minutes, well, we have 10 minutes left here. So does this, I want to check in with you here for a moment. Is that you know, like we're talking it through, right? Is this a helpful way to try to understand what this massive amount of, you know, results are, and to help you sort of, part of what I'm after is to make sure that you're not just going down some rabbit hole, right, of trying to achieve perfection. Well, really, there might be 2 or 3 key actions that are actually really would make the biggest difference. And if you focused on those and got them right, that would actually make a difference to your business, right? So image compression may not be it, but keywords probably are, and structured data for sure is. Anyway, so this is a helpful, how we're doing. How's everybody?
I think on the Crane website, we also have that same error in that bottom section, or, you know, failed section about the structured data. So we're definitely going to be, or I certainly will be paying avid attention next week to try to start to understand about that. Because like you said, since it weighs everything equally, it's like, it's a good image, but it's not necessarily a clear image. So I think we're really excited to get into that topic and see how we can, what tools exist, like you're mentioning, to make it a bit easier for us, but also just understanding how it works. So we can also discover other ways too of how we can implement more of that in a
exactly. And I think I had mentioned to you in the last series of workshops is, hey, sometimes the best answer is use Facebook events in addition to your site. Like, it might be hard to get the attention you need from somebody to help you with that as quickly as you do. So there is that stopgap solution. It's not ideal, but it'll work. Right? So there's always workarounds for anything. What we ultimately need is, I think what you ultimately want is that you're the expert in your own, that you're considered the authoritative source on your own content. Right? And that Google starts to recognize you as the authoritative source on your own content. And I think you'll fare better ultimately with that, because when you leave it up to others to interpret you, then that's exactly what you did. You're going to get an interpretation of mine about you, and that may not be exactly what you want. that may leave out important things, or that may overemphasize certain things that are not actually, salient to you. Can I get, sorry, Eileen, go ahead.
Apropos of links, is it appropriate? Will it function if one built simplistically a links page?
Yes, absolutely. So if you have a if you do a page that says, here's the other my colleagues across the country, absolutely that works. That's very powerful. Google has ways to understand that this is actually relevant content, right? Because they have a huge database sitting behind all of this. So they will cross-reference, they will do all kinds of magic in the back end with their algorithms. Absolutely useful. If you're in the art service organization business, you will find link pages quite often to other art service organizations that those organizations are super helpful. And if you do a festival, it's the most natural to want to encourage the people you're presenting to link to their event on your site, right? And sometimes they will, and sometimes they won't. There's lots of reasons why people can accomplish a thing, but it's really it's more likely they do if you ask them. Right? It becomes that little bit more important. Now, can I ask what are you all using? If you can just do a quick go around, what are the tools you're using that are running your websites? Like, I know, Eileen, you're using Wix.
Yeah, we're on a Wix and we're coded, and that is a question about, you have plugins for WordPress that may not exist per se for, so I would love a plugin.
Yep.
But I just built a new website, so I don't want to change platforms because I don't.
Totally. No, and Wix is a very stable, very good platform. It just doesn't have the same developer environment. But I will make sure that we talk about Wix and what you need to do when you have a Wix site in this next workshop to actually get the structured stuff implemented. WordPress. Anybody use anything else? So using the free version of WordPress, WP.org is the free version of WordPress.
And we're actually in a paid tier, higher tier of Wix, so you can get quite a wide range of, and we're in a sort of mid-range of service with quite a depth of capacity.
Great. Are you all also using your web? I mean, so normally in normal times, obviously your websites would be likely optimized towards highlighting your events.
We certainly build stuff here, but we also, speaking to ticketing and speaking to platforms, because some of the, like Wix in particular, can actually do your ticketing, but we happen to have a ticket provider who is not Eventbrite. And so, and in the researches of and the functionalities of those different things and why you do whatever you do in that particular, given that we're presenters, most of us at this point or at some point in our purposefulness. Also, the other issue is presenting interfaces, like, I don't know, because I went to your national digital thing, that the choice between Vimeo, YouTube, PPN, etc. is that, and I don't mean to sell A or B, is there a functionality difference? Is there a cost difference? Is there a burning reason to do something or not do something, or it's choice and personal preference?
Some of that latter part of the questions is a little bit more suited to our last series of workshops, where we're talking more about the business models and revenue generation and things of that nature.
Cool.
But I'll take a look to see how YouTube and things like that interface with structured data. That's actually a good question. YouTube, while it is a Google service, it actually, as you know, like trying to do a search in YouTube behaves completely differently from a search in Google. That, like, you have to be far more precise. You can't misspell stuff, right? Like it's a different search function, in fact, even though it's the same company, it's not. So they're not all equal on things. I will take a look at structured data on YouTube. One of the things that you may have noticed happening sometimes when you get a search result and a video is a search result, you sometimes see a video that all of a sudden gives you, it tells you at this time in that specific video, this topic appears. Have you ever seen that in the last little while? You see that sometimes now. That's because they're actually coding the video content using structured data to slice the content of a video. That's pretty new, but I think we're going to see that more often as more and longer video gets created. So I'm going to take a look for next week's workshop to see if I can make a bit more sense out of that. Actually, that might be really helpful, because that would be a pro and con on the business model conversation, right? To really understand the connecting points. So thank you for that.
I think it is a website connecting point for those of us that are trying to decide whether we're hybrid or not too in streaming, and what's website driven and what's other platform driven, and how do you get from A to B or put it on your speed and stuff like that too.
Yep. Yeah, I think the thing that everybody has discovered is trying to stream stuff off your own website. You tend to be vastly underpowered. Like you can't handle 50 people pinging heavy content at the same time. it'll just break, right? It'll just go. It'll just kind of kill itself. So you're always on that side of it. You will always have to deal with a third-party provider, and the question is absolutely which one, and what are the benefits you're looking for, and how do you think about that from a business standpoint, not just from an expedient or convenient standpoint. And that's definitely a more complicated conversation. We'll leave some of that for the sort of the third series, which I think that's in March, is it? Well, remember that's late February, March. So this piece is going to be interesting. Now, anybody using anything else? So I got Wix and WordPress to account for right now. Out of this group, I think that those are the two, eh?
Excuse me, is Kajabi a new thing, or is it a platform that like Teachable or something like that are using their?
I have nothing this idea.
So entity that I work with works in Kajabi. So
how do you know how to spell that? Is that Kaja?
She's got it. Andrea's got it there. I think I will look it up. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll make sure I'll take a look and figure out what that is. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to be convening. So I think this next workshop is happening twice. It's going to be identical in terms of content. We're meeting on Saturday for those who are preferring a Saturday, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And we're repeating the same content with whatever conversation people bring to that on Wednesday, so in a week from today as well. So you got a couple of options in terms of the next session.
So this website, it's not today's that's repeating, it's the next one.
It's the next one, yeah.
Unit 2 is going up twice.
That's correct.
Thank you. And
so you can simply choose if you prefer a Saturday or if the Wednesday works for you. So choose one or the other. And the website should say both the 15th and the 19th. Amy, if you can double check that, that would be great.
Yeah, I'll go and check and correct. Thank you, Eugenia.
That's awesome. Any closing comments from anybody? We're at the end of our time here today, so.
Yeah, so thanks everybody for joining us. I'm going to get this recording up shortly, maybe by the end of the day today. And we'll see you again on Saturday or next week, or at any of the upcoming workshops in the rest of this series or the next one. Thank you to Canada Council for their support of this all these workshops and these series, and we'll see you again soon.